Um, I'm from the law school, and I'm going to introduce you to our today's speaker. Just a little bit about myself, but I'll be brief because you're not here to hear what I have to say. You're here to hear Andrea's talk. But I've been working in over 30 years or so in the areas of governance and technology, knowledge and property in the context of global challenges like public health, food security, and biodiversity conservation, and climate change. Anyway, enough of me. I'm here, really, as I say, to welcome you to this virtual seminar of the Global Food Environment Institute. And the talk today will be on the topic of the role of quality labels on global food sustainability and rural development. And our presenter is Dr. Andrea Zappalaglio, who is a close colleague of mine in law school. Andrea has focused on quality and origin labels, becoming internationally recognized as an expert in the law of geographical indications and special marks, types of trademark like collective marks. His work has been acknowledged by the European Commission as one of the sources of evidence and data used to devise the recent reform of EU law in this area. He's also served as an advisor for the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and as well as various national governments, and as a consultant for several public and private stakeholders. So he will start in just a minute or two, but first I need to say that the Global Food and Environment Institute, for those who don't know it very well, is an interdisciplinary research community which brings together members from across academia, industry, and public policy to work on integrated challenges of food security and climate change. They have a website, Leeds AC UK, / global food, one word. So this seminar is part of a series of seminars, and so do check the chat function with a link to our series. So it's advertised on Eventbrite and our website. You can also follow on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. So before I introduce Dr. Zappalaglio, I wish to remind you of the seminar etiquette. Please ensure your cameras and microphones are switched off for the duration of the seminar. The presentation will take about 20 minutes, during which please use the chat function addressed to everyone with a question. So we take questions through the chat function, and I will collate those questions. And in the 10 minutes for Q&A, those will form the basis of discussion. Okay, so may I also remind you that the seminar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available via YouTube. So, and now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Andrea Zappalaglio. So the floor is yours now, Andrea.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Graham. And thank you very much to GFEI for organizing the seminar, and also to all of you who decided to join us. So today I would like to tell you something about the role of food quality labels on global food sustainability and rural development. And it's not easy, of course, to summarize in 20 minutes a topic which I have been investigating for almost 10 years. So I will provide some inputs, and then, of course, I will be happy to answer to all your questions. So, so Graham introduced me already. I am an associate professor in intellectual property law here at the School of Law of the University of Leeds. So that's going to be my point of view. So the point of view of branding, labeling, and intellectual property law in relation to sustainability. I would like to talk about three things today. So first of all, I will I will frame the topic. So let's see geographical indications. Let's try to explore the concepts of geographical indications, collective marks, and other quality labels, which have been spreading around the world over the last decade. And then I would like to talk about the narrative. So this idea, which is very common, especially in Europe and continental Europe, according to which quality labels are the intellectual property right, which could really play an important role in supporting green transition and improving sustainability and rural development. And then I would like to focus on geographical indications and showing you that things are a bit more complicated than that, than the narrative. And I will give you just an idea of how the relationship between GIs, quality labels in general, and sustainability works in practice. Maybe some of you are into policy, maybe some of you work into rural development. So I think it's important to tell a thing or two about how to practically tackle the challenges of sustainability and rural development using quality labels and geographical indications specifically. So first of all, you see here, quality labels are a very large set. You can see here this circle, which represents the most important of them. Some years ago, I had a crazy idea. Let's start writing a monograph on quality labels. I had to give it up for the simple reason that it's not possible in just 300 pages to summarize everything and explain the functioning of all of them. So keeping things very simple. Quality labels are all labels which tell us how a product is made. They come in different forms, but of course, for instance, here you see the very famous fair trade mark. That's a good example. So essentially, it shows you that the product has been produced in accordance with some standards, certified by an independent stakeholder, the Fair Trade Organization. So they represent some value. So you're happy to buy the fair trade good because you know that producers have been rewarded fairly, that the environment has not been harmed, etc., etc., etc. The fair trade mark doesn't tell you, however, where the product was made. In fact, if you buy a fair trade product, usually you will find another indication, which technically we call an indication of source, that tells you, for instance, this is a fair trade good from Ecuador, from Ivory Coast, etc., etc. The geographical indication is a special kind of quality label. It's an origin label. So it's a label that tells you where a product has been produced, where a product was produced, as well as, of course, giving you some ideas concerning the quality of the product. Now, the key difference, but I will focus on this more in depth in a second. The key difference is that if you have an origin label, essentially you create a link between a product and a place, a specific place, and these has some advantages because, of course, a place means a community, a place means that you generate value, you create value, and most importantly, you keep it there. So you represent a community and you reward directly that place, that community, those producers. At least this is the theory. Now, giving you some more details, for instance, fair trade is a certification mark. So essentially, the idea is that there is an independent certification authority, in this case, the Fair Trade Organization, that essentially grants licenses to applicants who respect the standard set by the authority. So essentially, let's say that I am a producer of chocolate based somewhere in Africa or Central South America. I want the fair trade mark. What do? I make sure I comply with the specification. I send the Fair Trade Organization the documents, and if the organization, which is not involved in the production, it just certifies what I do. If the organization is satisfied, I will be authorized to use the fair trade mark, and therefore my products will become more distinctive on the market. I can use the fair trade distribution chain, etc., etc. The collective mark is another special mark. Here, this is a collective mark which represents a community of producers in the Philippines. So the idea of the collective mark is like creating a club. So me and you, we are a group of producers. We can produce the same product, or maybe, like in the case you see here, we can produce different products, but we all belong to the same community. And so we register a collective mark, which represents us all, and we adopt our own regulations governing the use of the mark. And everyone is able to use the mark as long as you respect the rules. This is why this is often called a club right, because it's like a club, you know, anyone can come in as long as you respect the rules of the club. The traditional specialty guaranteed is an interesting example, and I want to discuss this with you because I believe that many of you come from different places, maybe from outside the Europe, the European continent, and the European Union. Traditional specialties guaranteed, essentially, they are quality labels that indicate that a product has been produced according to traditional recipes or traditional ingredients. The idea of the traditional recipe is more common. So let's say that I make original, traditional Neapolitan pizza, that's a TSG. Essentially, it doesn't mean that the pizza I produce comes from Naples, but it means that I produce it in accordance with the traditional rules. This label here is very neglected in the European Union because everyone wants geographical indications, but it has become more interesting for non-European countries. For instance, I personally cooperated with the Andean regions to help introducing this label in Peru. You see here the label. So here, unfortunately, I could spend an hour only on this topic, but it's important to remember this. Geographical indications are based on the concept of origin. So the idea that a product inherently belongs there because of the physical and environmental specificities of the place, or just because of historical factors. In other words, you say a product originates from a given place because it has always been made there. The problem of origin is that it was developed with the paradigm of wine in mind. It's essentially a French concept. And this is not really universal. Instead, the concept of tradition is a bit easier to understand. It's a bit more global in this sense. And this is why South American countries are interested, and also other jurisdictions around the world have at least shown interest in this label, because the producer in Peru, let's say, may not be very familiar with the technical idea of origin in the way the European Union construes it. But of course, if you ask him, is this product traditional of this place? Well, the answer is probably going to be yes. Why? Because my father used to do this, my grandfather used to do this. It's very important for our community. It's a symbol of who we are, etc., etc. So traditional specialties guaranteed are a quality label which essentially is non-existent in Europe, but a number of countries around the world are finding it interesting. And then, of course, there is the big thing, the geographical indication. So this intellectual property right that protects names of places which are inherently linked to a specific area. So, of course, the most famous GI in the world is Champagne, of course. So Champagne in the European Union is not a generic term. It's the name of a very specific place in northeastern France. And so The origin label is there to tell you this is not just a generic sparkling wine. This is champagne wine, so a wine which has been produced for more than 3 centuries. And of course, you know, champagne brings all sorts of symbolism. It's a symbol of wealth. It's a symbol of parties. It's a symbol of a luxury, etc., etc. So, in my short introduction, I mentioned that there is this idea that quality labels are the tool in the realm of intellectual property, of course, are the tool that will save the world, that will solve our problems related to sustainability, etc., etc. And here you can find a number of different examples. So securing sustainability through geographical indications, that's the European Union. WIPO collective marks as a tool of development. By the way, if you're interested in case studies, WIPO website is a great source of case studies, examples, materials, and it's a fantastic website, in my opinion, etc. So why does fair trade mean sustainable trade, etc.? So the narrative is pretty clear. Because quality labels represent the qualities of a specific product, in other words, represents the qualities created by a specific group of producers, which produces the product, so represents the work of these producers, they create a link and they make sustainable products more distinctive. So one, they encourage sustainable practice because, of course, you want to show that your product is sustainable. At the same time, you are rewarded for it because the idea is you are protected. No one else can make that product. For instance, take champagne. No one else can make champagne without following those rules. So these are products which are normally a bit more expensive to make compared to similar generic products. But at the same time, they give you more advantages in terms of fairness, in terms of sustainability. They support rural development. And all of this is represented by the sign. And the sign creates value on the marketplace. Is this true? Well, a big issue when it comes to analyzing and especially conducting empirical analysis in this area is that unfortunately, for obvious reasons, institutions that support these labels, here there is the example of WIPO, but of course the European Commission is another typical example. They have invested a lot of effort and political credit over the last, 10 years or so in strengthening and expanding geographical indications and in signing and promoting bilateral agreements with non-EU countries to spread the GI, the European GI culture, which is particularly demanding. So, of course, they will never present cases where this structure has failed. But unfortunately, there are some sad stories. So it's all about assessing what you do and what you can concretely get out of the application of quality labels, of geographical indications. Make you an example. In this book I've recently published, there is a fantastic contribution by Giovanni Belletti and Andrea Marescotti to leading economists in this area. They wrote this great contribution, the multifaceted contribution of geographical indications to sustainability. If someone here is interested in the topic, if someone here is a PhD student, I recommend reading this contribution, especially, well, not exclusively, but especially for the footnotes, because they present a literature review which is fantastic. So Belletti and Marescotti have been working in the area of geographical indications and their impact on rural development for many, many years. And they've been working for the Food and Agriculture Organization on a regular basis. So what do they say? Essentially, they say that yes, of course, these labels, especially geographical indications, they focus specifically on geographical indication but I believe we can make a similar discussion for some kind of special trademarks as well. So they contribute to sustainable development, especially because they strengthen localized agri-food production system. This is what I was mentioning earlier. So the idea is you create common rules, you bring producers together, you protect them, you give them a tool to protect what they do against counterfeiting, against misappropriation, etc., etc. And so you create value and you keep it in a very specific place. Doesn't matter if you are a rural community living in a remote place, you can make the system work. But of course, there are a number of problems. As they observe, they are often linked to structural aspects, coordination between actors, access to credit, poor human resources, and entrepreneurial skills. So I will just give you some ideas here, some short inputs. The big problem, which you will often see when you assess the narrative, is that the narratives often, not always, but often, they present the label as the solution. Because, of course, there is an interest in promoting these tools. And so the idea is, are you a small community working on French Alps or working somewhere in remote areas? Well, you should invest a little bit. You should create your producer association, register a GI, and you will see things are going to improve. That's not exactly the case because, and this is where I would like to go into a bit more managerial discussion. Labels are always the last ring of the chain. So they are very successful if you have ticked a number of boxes which logically come before them. For instance, labels themselves can fail. Why? Because people don't know them or they're not adequately advertised. So the idea is the image of your product, is the label your core strength? Invest on this. Otherwise, find other ways. Or maybe geographical indications are just not the right tool. So GIs can be very bureaucratic, their registration process is long, they are complex, they require an existing community of producer which has to work well. That's not always the case. So sometimes you must find a better alternatives, like collective marks, for instance. This is usually the work of consultants. WIPO does a great job providing producer with the good options, with the good alternatives. Rules are another big problem. So they may not represent the product or reflect the practice. This happens very often where you have a large community and then a subset in that community takes the lead, writes the specification without really having a good idea of what others do. This is very dangerous, especially because products can be complex. You can have 5 variants of them. So if your specification only includes 2 variants, you are not protecting this form of traditional cultural expression. You are actually destroying them because you are cutting legitimate variants off. This often happens where you have a top-down approach. Sometimes governments can be very eager. They say, we are going to protect our producers. Let's register a GI or let's register a collective mark that represents them. The problem is that the producer don't really know it. They don't really know about it or don't really know how to use it. If a label represents no one, well, you're going to fail. And then, I am coming to my conclusion in a minute, you have to take a look at the wider context. So producers have to be working together effectively. And this can take years and years and years. You force a quality label in a context where you don't really have this network, that's going to fail. Or maybe producers are not informed enough on the costs of introducing a quality label and on how this is supposed to work. So, coming to my conclusions, quality labels are complex pieces. And even if we have a narrative that strongly supports them, especially but not exclusively in Europe, their management and building an environment where they can really be important and effective, it's another story. They can empower local communities, subgroups like women, they can create value even in remote places, but this requires skills, knowledge, and knowing how to make them work. And this requires a synergy between producers, local governments, consultants, and more often than not, international organizations like FAO and WIPO. So I would welcome more research on the failures because, yeah, it's something which I believe it's lacking. Thank you very much. And please visit GFEI website and also follow the activities of our newly introduced technology governance and IP research group. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Andrea. That's you're very economical there. You 20 minutes. You only slightly went over, so that's admirable. So very well done. I'd like to make the questions open to anybody to ask. Please feel free to put them in the chat. And while you're thinking of your questions or writing them, I should just mention that. Andrea was perhaps too modest to mention he does have also a monograph that he did about 4 years ago. It came out for the
Yep.
transformation of EU geographical indications law, the present, past, and future of the origin link. So that one, 4 years ago, yeah, that came out.
Yeah, May 2021.
And yeah, okay. And while I'm at it, we're still waiting for questions. I should mention this is in a way, GIs is about sort of about in a way carving out a place in the market in foods and drinks for goods that are the antithesis of innovation. Their strength is they're not innovations. They're not things you could brand as innovative products. They are actually traditional or they are very, very local. And of course, as Andrea, I think, was alluding towards the end, saying, this is part of strategy, but GIs have to be made to work. They're not automatically going to do the things you want them to do, which is to valorize locality, authenticity, tradition, and the way that the laws and rules can be drafted should follow quite specific objectives that you want to pursue. Is it about origin? Is it about tradition? Is it about authenticity? All these things are important, but which ones are deemed to be most important matters for the purpose of drafting rules and regulations. So alongside that is an issue I think that's of wide importance to GFEI is about supply chains, localizing supply chains. And so these are, in a sense, marketing tools, wouldn't you say, Andrea, that don't function in isolation from other strategies, other tactics, ways of doing business, and also what do governments want to achieve in terms of rural development, rural economic growth, particularly in isolated areas. That's something that is being very much discussed in Europe, but not necessarily so much in some other parts of the world. And Andrea,
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And when we talk about geographical indications, the idea is that they are quality schemes. So the label is just what you see on products. In fact, that their strength, which of course geographical indications have, and sometimes trademarks don't have, is that they also introduce specific rules. And so the creation of sustainable supply chains can be actually promoted by geographical indications because you introduce rules. The problem is that, of course, thinking that you introduce rules and all of a sudden your supply chain becomes efficient and effective, well, that's not what happens. You have to work first on people and their organization, and then you work on the labels.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. It's a great question from Stuart Kirk. Now, I've just this very week I've just shared a bottle of wine with my wife from Kent,
Yeah.
Kentish red wine. So, so do you think that climate change forces a relaxation or maybe an adjustment of GI of identities, identities, as for example, wine production does move north?
Yeah, I mean, here are just two quick points. Thank you, Stuart, for the question. Some time ago, a researcher from Finland asked me, so if with climate change, thanks to climate change, we can start making wine in Finland, would that be a GI? And my answer was, I'm looking forward to drink Finnish red wine. Because yes, of course, the idea of origin simply means that you can prove some kind of relationship between the place and the product. So let's say that Finland becomes a place where vines can grow, just describe that kind of link, and probably you will get a GI, of course. But probably the system can be flexible. The real issue here is what will happen if because of climate change, the production conditions become very different, too different. I make you an example. Today, because of climate change, some areas are becoming less and less suitable for the production of wine. And so producers are introducing new varieties of grapes, genetically modified varieties of grapes. The problem is that still an origin product? Is that still a traditional product? And there is an ongoing discussion. My personal take on this is that tradition is something about the communities. And traditions evolve. So if the community says, okay, we are using new varieties of grapes, but the product still represents us, it's fine. If climate change will change places so much that the product will become something substantially different or even impossible to produce, that's a whole different story. I hope this answers your questions here.
Any other questions? Coming up? Yeah.
How much evidence is there that public pay attention to this mark in their purchasing habits? So this changes a lot depending on the country. So countries like Italy, France, Spain, Greece, there is evidence that more consumers pay attention to it. In other countries and in general in the European context, not that high. Evidence suggests that 15-16% of consumers know what these labels mean. Of course, GIs work independently because they introduce schemes, and so they produce effects regardless of consumers' perception. Then, consumer perception is a funny thing because, for instance, once I read an article claiming that red labels, so the PDO, the protected designation of origin, which has a red label, is more recognizable by consumers than the PGI, the protected geographical indication, because the PDO is red, the PGI is blue, and apparently consumers react better to red than blue. This was the thesis of the article. So consumers' perception can be very funny and unpredictable sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as a follow-up, do you think there's yeah, you must know whether there's research on if there has been research on the traditional specialities guarantee, particularly where the link is not so obvious in the sense that it's a mark that used for products that are produced outside the area of origin. So, for example, as you will know, Andrea, there's one on a Neapolitan pizza, which means that anybody, any restaurant in Europe can put on their menu Neapolitan pizza. It doesn't have to be from Naples. it doesn't have to be a traditional Neapolitan style. It's just a name. But if you want to follow the recipe of the Neapolitan pizza makers, then you would use the actual TSG mark, I guess, on the menu or on any advertising and literature. But I've never actually yet, and I do like pizza, so I've done field work, you might say, but I've never really seen that TSG label being actually used for Neapolitan pizza on menus. So I just wonder about that's it's a what a question, not about that in particular, but about these TSGs. Do they really work? You know? Yeah.
I mean, it depends on your expectations, I guess. So, for instance, Neapolitan pizza must be baked, must be cooked and eaten immediately. So having a label on menus makes little sense. You have a different kind of protection, which is an unfair competition defense, if you want. So if you're saying you're selling traditional Neapolitan pizza, you're not. That's passing off on that unfair competition. But who is going to enforce that? Let's say I open a pizza place in Vancouver. Who is the guy from Naples who's going to find out? So the truth is that they do play a role, which is very similar, if you want, to the role of the intangible heritage, so UNESCO intangible heritage. So it's more a badge of recognition, the idea that this product exists and this is how the tradition wants it. So it's a kind of way to protect intangible heritage, as long as your expectations are not too high. They are not intellectual property rights, by the way. The European Union excludes it. So they are more like a label you put there. You could sue guys who sell fake traditional pizza. This has never happened. It's more a way for producers to say, we exist, the tradition exists, and this is what you should do.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think I'm not really meant to be asking the questions at all, really, but so it seems right that as we just before we finish, is there one last question from somebody other than me? Any other final questions from anybody? Okay, I guess not. Was it 12:40 we meant to wrap up? Or was it 12:45?
I think 1240.
12:40, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, by the time I finish thanking you, I think we'll be at 12:40. Right. So yeah. So thanks so much, Andrew. I'm sure everybody learned a lot from that, particularly those of you who are quite new to this kind of these kinds of rules. And I think if you're interested now, there's so much actually been written on this. And those of you who are not law people, I think you shouldn't worry too much. This is not heavy law, is it, Andrea? And in fact, the first article I read on this area of law was actually written by a New Zealand geographer called Warren Moran in issue
Mm.
called Geography in 1993, which I thought was an outstanding article, particularly at the time. So it is very much of interest all people outside of law, and also I think people outside law can contribute quite a lot to this subject in terms of advancing learning on how to do these things, how to do it right, as well as how not to, in a wider context of helping rural people, particularly who are dedicated to high quality, actually maintain the integrity of their goods and actually get a place in the market fairly, a much stronger position in the marketplace for what are essentially low volume products to be sold at good prices, which go back to the producers. Okay, so thanks so much, Andrea, and thank you to GFEI for making this thing happen in the first place. And I wish you all a very good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone.
Just wait. Thank you, Andrea.